Hello, this is Dr. Llewellyn Eisen, and this is the third of three short lectures on Christian worship in early Christian history, getting in and staying in. So, as you know from our last two lessons on this unit, our goals are to consider the core groups of early Christian communities, which we have done, the core rituals of early Christian liturgy, which we have also done, and then finally, the role of the material in the practice of religion. And some of this was introduced to us in the homework for the second class, and the question was, how are Christian communities adapting to the prevailing Roman culture? We identified three ways: through worship and communal architecture, through liturgical time, and then also through the Holy Dead, which we're going to unpack now in support of question or goal 3, the role of the material in the practice of religion. So remember again that rituals require sense perception. They require that you see things, that you touch things, that you hear and smell and taste things, and that doing all of these things contribute to the socialization of people into a particular religion. So as I mentioned in lesson 1, art and architecture provides a container for religious groups, or architecture and art provides a container for an individual as well, a way for them to be socialized into the group through behaviors that are both communal and also personal. So the earliest kinds of architectural spaces for Christians within which rituals could happen and in which liturgy was enacted was in house churches. Very simple, right? Christianity is not a legal religion. It's not illegal, but it's not a legal religion. It doesn't really want to make a big show, and the communities were small. What you're looking at here is the exterior of one of the earliest worship spaces that we have left to us in early Christian history. And this is a house church in a place called Dura Europa, which is in modern day Turkey. So this is the exterior, and this is a cross section of what the interior would have looked like. It's a typical Roman house. Here you have the entrance, and the entrance opens out into a courtyard, and around the exterior of that space you have rooms. Here is stairs to an upper floor, and of course, you know, the central courtyard that's open is important for letting in fresh air. We're going to look at pictures of this space here. This was the baptistry. This is a less than perfect picture of the baptistry. Here is where people would have been baptized. I love how this looks like a 1970s bathtub. Very small. Notice, though, that above the baptistry and along the side wall, you have artistic renderings. It's really difficult to see what this is, but I'm going to show you a close-up that isn't great. Probably hard to see it, but here we have an agape meal. We have people pictured around a table, and then here we have a figure with an animal on his shoulders, and that is probably a sheep or a goat, this being a shepherd. Down here we have a couple who are appearing to be in a modest pose, probably an Adam and Eve figure. So this is Dura Europus. It's one of the earliest churches again, and it's a very, very small space. As Christianity increased in population and the spaces or the size of the congregations necessitated a larger structure, the second type of architectural space that was very often employed is a basilica. Now, why wouldn't Christians just build worship space in the form of a temple? Well, some did. Some Christian communities reused temples that had, ceased to be populous, and some built churches along the architectural design of a temple. But most early Christian buildings took this form of a basilica because a basilica was a public space. So it was egalitarian in that sense, which is an intentional move to create an egalitarian space for people. There's a lot of room in which you can move. And in time, naturally, an altar is going to be created up here because this is where people will speak to the congregations, and it's the site from which you can be heard. So the homework question for this lesson was, how does religious art and architecture contribute to, shape, or even prohibit ritual behavior? So the easy answer to this is that architecture organizes how people function within a space, and it organizes how they are meant to think and behave within a certain space. If we look at the architectural model of an early Christian space, Old St. Peter's in Rome, which was constructed in the early 4th century, we can see that the architecture is designed to shape the way people move in the space. So here we have the atrium. Now, during times of illness or plague, this would be where the ill would be located. So these are meant right here to indicate columns, and columns help to organize the flow of people and the movement of people. It keeps people from stampeding, if you will. It forces them to behave in an orderly fashion. This is the area where you would have the ill being laid if this space became a space for the treatment of disease. Here you have a narthex. This is sort of the preliminary space before you enter the sacred area. And this is where the catechumens would go during the Eucharist, because they were not allowed to participate in the Eucharist. Here are a couple of examples of some atriums, and you can see from the photographs that there's plenty of space for people to be cared for, and in many cases water for cleansing yourself of, the dirt of the day or the dust of the city. Here again is the narthex, and then from the narthex one would process into the nave. The term nave comes from naval, and very often this is the church is affiliated with a ship, hence the word navy, a port in a storm, if you will. And here we have the central aisle, and then the additional aisles, which are control the movement of people in this particular space here. Alongside the nave, along the edges of the aisle, are pretty elaborate artistic cycles. In San Apollinare Nuovo, you have up here, along the side of the nave, you have mosaics of figures that we've already met. On this side, you have a procession of men. On this side, you have a procession of women. And this is part of the answer to the question, how does art and architecture sort of organize or control a space? Anybody standing in the nave would be expected to engage in the same behavior as those who are depicted along the side of the walls. Here we have, I've put some pictures so you can see more clearly. Here are the women processing towards the altar, and here are the men processing towards the altar. Now, these figures we've met before, actually. Notice the name up here, Felicitas, and the name Perpetua. Yes, it is actually Perpetua and Felicitas. Notice that Perpetua is, of course, processing first, ahead of her servant, Felicitas. processing towards the altar. Notice they are carrying their crowns because they are martyrs. These are all martyr saints, and they are put up there to accompany the living as they face the altar where, according to the business of liturgy, one hears the word and one receives the sacrament. So what are they processing towards? They're processing towards the bema and the altar. This is the space in the basilica where the priest and the bishop and the deacons would engage in the business of the liturgy, where they would engage in the distribution of the sacraments, the reading of the word. And this is considered really the most sacred space in this building. Here is an example of an apse in, this is St. John Lateran, just outside of the old walls in Rome, and some pretty magnificent architecture. And you've probably noticed, for those of you who are educated in art and architecture, that the images themselves are drawing from standard canonical models. So what are the influences of the art and architecture of the early Christian period? In terms of the influences, you have primarily two kinds. You have classical models, which are fairly naturalistic, and they depict the human form in its highest example, its most beautiful, symmetrical examples. Here we have Apollo Belvedere, a classic model, a perfect example of ancient artistic beauty. And here we have a figure known as the Good Shepherd. Now, this may be a Christian image, or it may not be a Christian image. We don't know. What we have here is depicted a Roman youth, a very beautiful young man with a shepherd on his shoulders. He could be the Good Shepherd, meaning Jesus, or he could be a Good Shepherd, meaning any good shepherd. We don't know. So this is part really of sort of the beautiful ambiguity of early Christian art, is that it is adopting and using the same models of the artistic world in which it is emerging. And so it might be Christian or it might not. Other artistic influences include the use of mosaics, which is a more abstract form of artistic rendering. Here we have again a Roman youth, and here we have an image of the figure of Jesus. We only know that this is a figure of Jesus because of the initials here of the chi, the Greek chi, and the Greek rho, which is in English is a C and a CH and an R. So the first three letters of the title Christos. But you wouldn't know that unless you knew what you were looking for. Another example of a mosaic that shows us the use of both the classical models within the method of the mosaic is, here we have a mosaic of Helios, the god of the sun, here with his spiky sun rays on his crown. And here we have the figure of Jesus also as Helios. Here is a wheel of his chariot. Here we have the horses pulling the chariot. Here we have the figure of Jesus and the spiky crown. And you wouldn't know this was the figure of Jesus unless you knew what you were looking for. Other artistic influences include funerary portraits. Here we have some Egyptian funerary portraits, obviously some of the elite and some of the not quite as elite. And it might seem that this is very far away from Christian art, but if you take a look at, if we get closer and closer to artistic renderings of people and less of pharaohs, you'll begin to see what I'm talking about. These are the Fayum portraits. These are artistic renderings of people who have died on their coffins. And if we place the Fayum portrait next to an early Christian image of Jesus, we can see especially in the eyes, the rendering of the face, some very similar techniques, which we also see here in this funerary portrait. Even though this is really more like a mask, nevertheless, we can see some of the similar techniques. In terms of artistic content, a lot of the content of early Christian art is stories and activities. So we see the actions of Jesus. Here we've met this account before. This is the woman who touches Jesus' robe. We see here the raising of Lazarus. And some of these early ones have Jesus performing miracles with like a wand, which is kind of fun. Here we have the gathering of a meal. Other stories and activities that we see are Hebrew Bible stories. Here we have the account of Jonah, okay, being tossed overboard, being swallowed by a sea creature, being spat back up, and then being really angry, which is, part of the story. Here we have the story of the 3 youths in the fire. Here we have the story of Moses. Notice the common theme, right, of the dove as a figure representing God's Spirit. Other artistic stories and activities that we find are accounts of martyr events. Here we have Lazarus. I believe his name was Lazarus, and he was burnt on a grill. And I love this way he's just sort of dancing merrily to his tools of martyrdom. Here we have an account of the Gospels. Here we have a cupboard with the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Images of Jesus are always very ambiguous in early Christian art. We've talked about this, about how the earliest images of Jesus are not Jesus on the cross. They are very pastoral. Again, here is that Good Shepherd statue that we don't know if this is a statue of Jesus or not. Here we have another image of a Good Shepherd carved onto a sarcophagus. Here we have a mosaic of a pastoral figure, and these are catacomb renderings. So within the funeral sites of Christians, we have these images of a good shepherd. And it makes sense, right? Remember, the image of the cross was an image of shame. The image of the crucifix was an image of which was an image of embarrassment for early Christians. And the figure of the good shepherd is a comforting image. And it makes sense for communities that are in upheaval or are facing uncertainty. It makes sense that a crucified, dying figure would not be a figure of comfort. Here we have that earliest image of Jesus on the cross, that piece of graffiti that reads, Alexamenos worships his God. And we have, and you can see it here, the figure of the donkey-headed person on a cross. Here we have Alexamenos worships his God. And here we have the figure here. Other ways that Christian communities adapted to the prevailing Roman culture was through their use of liturgical time. We want to keep in mind that the Roman world, the Mediterranean world, was very religious, even though religion, of course, is a category that we create. But their days and their months were organized around the observation of what we would call religious events and figures. Here we have a mosaic of a calendar. Here's March, April, May, June would be back here, July and August. Notice there's Augustus, September, October, November, December, January, February. And for each one of those months, there's going to be an observance of multiple liturgical rites. And so this is going to be true for Christianity as well. It will adapt its calendar to the observation of significant sacred figures. What you're looking at here is an icon calendar that demonstrates the entirety of a month and who is being observed on any given day. So Christians, like anyone else in the late antique culture, are going to organize their day, their week, their month, and the entirety of their year around specific rites of veneration towards those whom they consider to be sacred people. Now, as we know, the God of the Jews was a God who was most appropriately worshipped in the temple in Jerusalem, which meant that once a year, an individual was meant to make a trip to Jerusalem to visit the temple. As well, we see what we can rightly call pilgrimage as a religious event in religions other than Judaism as well. So it's natural that pilgrimage, or the process of religious travel, would be something that Christians would also adapt as part of their sacramental life. Jesus was a historical figure, and so the places that he lived and the place that he died are naturally going to be important sacred sites for Christians, both in late antiquity and even in the 21st century. The answer to the question, what is the difference between a religious pilgrimage and tourism, I suppose depends on any given person's level of cynicism about A, religion, B, pilgrimage, C, travel in general, and D, intent. What is an individual's intent? Is their intent to gawk? Is their intent to demonstrate their level of religiosity, or is their intent to demonstrate something to themselves or their affection for their divinity, to prove something to themselves? There's a variety of ways you could go about analyzing that issue and answering that question. I look forward to reading what you have written in your homework in terms of the answer to this question. Regardless of the answer, pilgrimage plays an important role both in late antiquity and also in modern day Christianity. Here we have a pilgrim token from the site of Saint Simeon the Stylite. This is a important holy figure whom you are going to meet in the unit on the rise of monasticism. This is something that a person might get as a gift while they were there, and they could bring this home and they would be reminded of their time at the base of Simeon's column when they look at it, because there's his face, there he is. And so something of who he was would stay with him. Here we have Christians at the tomb of this is the site of Golgotha, where allegedly where Jesus was killed. And I don't know what this person is doing. It looks like they're extracting something, but I'm sure that's not allowed. They could also be trying to place maybe a prayer in that crack. It looks like that might be what's happening there. And then, of course, when Pope Francis became ordained as invested with the clothing of the papacy, naturally items were created that people could take home as a souvenir of their time in Rome. Pilgrimage provides evidence of the material culture of a sacramental life. Here we have a small grotto where pilgrims have come and placed items that demonstrate the types of needs that they have, the types of prayers that they're praying, the kinds of ways in which they suffer. For example, this is a type of object that can be left at a healing site because perhaps somebody has eye trouble or is hoping for insight. Notice here on this icon, people have brought their own jewelry to hang as a sign of having visited this site, or maybe they're offering these things to Mary and hoping that this will convince her of the sincerity of their prayers. So pilgrimage can teach us a lot about what matters to people and also about the ways that they are suffering. And pilgrimage sites are not just for holy figures. What you're looking at here is the exterior of Buckingham Palace when we learned that Princess Diana had been killed. And within hours, people brought flowers as a testament of their grief. And this is the memorial that was set up in her honor where she was killed in Paris. So pilgrimage sites aren't just for figures who are considered sacred or holy or divine. Pilgrimage sites can also be for any kind of a remembrance, whether that is a person who is considered a religious person or not. This is a pilgrimage site for many people in the United States. This is the Vietnam War Memorial, where people can go and see the names of their family members, or not their family members, but their fellow patriots who were killed in that horrible, horrible conflict, and leave flowers as well, or looks like a little American flag. There are pilgrimage sites for unknown individuals, known only to family members when they're killed at the side of the road in a horrible car accident, or to cultural figures like Jimi Hendrix or Kurt Cobain. Pilgrimage sites can also be sites of collective mourning. For example, Ground Zero after 9/11. Or they can be sites of cultural joy for some people. I mean, we all have a place or a person to whom we feel drawn. You know, and who are we to judge what is sacred from one person to the next? A second homework question for this unit is, what does the Lynch section on the Holy Dead teach us about early Christian thoughts and behaviors regarding the concept of resurrection and the dead body? This is a tough one. This concept of resurrection, this is a really difficult one for Christians. The concept of resurrection, as we talked about in week 2, was quite late to Judaism, and it was certainly necessary for the Christians to defend. Greeks believed that death was the end of existence, end of bodily existence at least. For Plato, the soul was immaterial and immortal, but certainly not the body. The Greeks and Romans know, and they knew what happened when a body died. It was disgusting and it smelled horrible, which is why you burned it, or you disposed of it outside of the city so that people would not be contaminated or offended by the smell. So the apologists, or the early Christian theologians, had to work out how the reality of death would factor into the Christian thought world, how the concept of the resurrection would work, and how this would relate to the dead body. Essentially, for early Christian theologians, the resurrection was their way of saying God says yes when life says no. and that immortality might be objective or it might also be subjective. There was it was open for discussion as far as that goes. The easiest and most immediate way to work with the dead body was through the concept of relics. And a relic is, short definition, that which is left behind. We have to remember that Christians understood the material world as essentially good. God created it, and what God created was good. This was a concept of the world that Christians would inherit from Judaism, and it's also why Gnosticism could not prevail, because for Gnostic Christians, the world and the flesh were evil and matter was bad. Okay? It had to be transcended. Proto-Orthodox and then Orthodox Christians would disagree with that fundamentally. They believed that the material world was good, that what God created was good, and that if it was good when it was alive, that it certainly was still good even after it was dead. And so therefore you honor the bodies of those who have departed, whether you honor the body of the Christian, whether the Christian is alive or not. And so Christians will have really no problem with dead bodies in a way that will make, and continues to make, some people uncomfortable and some Christians uncomfortable. Certainly Protestants don't have a relationship with the dead body the way Orthodox and Catholic Christians do. Here's a really nice example of a monastic community. And what you're looking at here is a group of Orthodox nuns who are in fact praying with the skulls of their sisters who have departed. And for them, this really isn't a problem. Their sisters are there with them, even though they are not with them in the same way. Questions about this or any of our subject matter, feel free to email me at isenbl@plu.edu. Thank you very much. Have a great day.